What if I told you the empire that Europeans scorned as the sick man of Europe was once the most powerful state on earth? An empire so vast and fearsome that kings and emperors trembled from Vienna to the Persian Gulf. How could such a colossal power, spanning 3 continents and ruling hundreds of peoples for 6 centuries, vanish almost overnight? And what terrifying choices led to its collapse? Friends, be sure to subscribe to my Quiet History channel, like it, and leave a comment of at least 7 words. This is necessary for the channel to function. Share this video with others if you think it's important. Thank you. Imagine the crossroads of civilizations where Europe, Asia, and Africa meet, bathed by 3 seas, the Black, the Mediterranean, and the Aegean. This land, known as Anatolia, was home to Hittite cities and Trojan legends, Greek colonies, Persian satrapies, Roman roads, and Byzantine churches. The very air was thick with the scents of eastern spices and salty sea breeze, while the cacophony of languages filled bustling markets. But beneath this vibrant mosaic, shadows of change were gathering. By the 13th century, the once mighty Byzantine Empire, heir to Rome's glory, was but a husk of its former self. The Fourth Crusade's brutal sack of Constantinople in 1204 shattered its power and pride. Though Byzantium briefly rose again in 1261, it was diminished, fractured, and vulnerable. On its fringes, small Turkish principalities, beyliks, sprang up, born from tribes driven westward by Mongol conquests. One of these was a tiny beylik ruled by Ertugrul, a leader who would unknowingly set a chain of fateful events in motion. When Ertugrul died around 1280, his son Osman inherited a patch of land and a band of 400 horsemen. No one could foresee that this modest principality, perched on the border with the crumbling Byzantine world, would become the seed of an empire that would rewrite history. But what was the price of such ambition? And how did one man, sentenced to death for treason, transform into a national hero and father of a new nation? Legend tells us that Osman dreamed of a great tree growing from his loins, its branches stretching across 3 continents, sheltering cities, fields, and seas. This ominous vision was more than prophecy. It was a harbinger of the relentless destiny awaiting him and his descendants. How could a dream carry the weight of such irreversible fate? How many would be sacrificed beneath those sprawling limbs? The fall of the Ottoman Empire was not simply a political collapse, nor just the loss of territory. It was the violent end of a multi-ethnic empire, the death throes of theocracy, and the birth pangs of secular nationalism. The transition ripped society apart, tore at identities, and rewrote the very consciousness of a people. Streets in modern Turkish cities still echo with the ghosts of this transformation, as if the past had just whispered yesterday, not centuries ago. It is a story of impossible choices made under dire circumstances, of empires collapsing and republics rising from the rubble. How did a nation sever ties with its imperial past so completely? How did it choose to embrace modernity at such a staggering cost? The human fear behind those decisions, fear of annihilation, of losing identity, pulsates through every chapter of this history. Long before the Ottomans, these lands were a tapestry of civilizations, a place where ancient temples stood beside Christian basilicas, where bells rang and prayers echoed in Greek, Armenian, and Syriac tongues. This cultural kaleidoscope shaped the world's destiny in ways few realize. But as shadows of empire gathered, that vibrant mosaic would fracture under the weight of relentless change. How did an empire that once dictated world affairs find itself on the brink of total extinction? What human choices, fraught with fear, betrayal, and sacrifice, sealed its fate? This is not just history. It is a saga of irreversible decisions, a relentless wave of tension crashing through centuries. The story of Osman and his people is a testament to the price of destiny and the haunting cost of transformation. Now, as you watch these tales unfold, remember the unbearable weight of those moments when a single decision meant the end or the beginning, when the past and future clashed in a thunderous storm. The story of the Ottoman Empire's rise and fall is not just about empires. It's about the human heart trembling on the edge of the unknown. So if you thought history was just dusty old books and forgotten kings, think again. This is a story packed with intrigue, betrayal, dreams, and nightmares, where every choice echoed through time like a gunshot in a dark alley. Ready to dive deeper? Subscribe to Quiet History and never miss a moment of these life-or-death stories. What drives a man to shift from mere raids to relentless conquest? How does one ruler's vision reshape an empire's fate? Osman I did not just raid like his Seljuk predecessors. He aimed for lasting dominion over Byzantine lands, setting a new course that would change history forever. Unlike the fleeting plundering of earlier nomads, Osman understood the power of strategy, control through cooperation. He offered non-Muslims safety, religious freedom, and self-governance in exchange for loyalty and taxes, an unprecedented policy in the region. Could this pragmatic approach outmatch the decaying Byzantine rule? Byzantium was crumbling under heavy taxes, brutal social inequality, and endless internal strife. Its people were vulnerable to raids and pirate attacks, with little protection from their rulers. Many Byzantine peasants and city dwellers found Osman's rule preferable. But this fragile peace was only the calm before a storm of irreversible change. Osman's death in 1324 came just before the capture of Bursa, a pivotal conquest that established the first capital of a new empire. His son, Orhan, inherited not just land, but a relentless momentum, pushing further into Byzantine territory with bold sieges of Nicaea in 1331 and Nicomedia in 1337. Orhan's military genius reshaped the Ottoman forces. He formed regular infantry units called the Yaya and cavalry known as Muselim, both paid and granted land. On the borders were the Ghazis, warriors driven by faith, rewarded with spoils and lands taken from the infidels. But the most revolutionary innovation was yet to come. The creation of the Janissary Corps marked a turning point. Initially recruited from Christian prisoners converted to Islam, the Janissaries evolved into an elite, professional fighting force. Through the Devshirme system, Christian boys were taken as a tax, indoctrinated, trained mercilessly, and transformed into loyal soldiers who wielded firearms long before many European armies. Orhan's forces crossed into Europe, exploiting Byzantine chaos, seizing the fortress of Tjimpe in 1354, and then Gallipoli itself. This foothold on the European continent was a brutal declaration. The Ottoman expansion was unstoppable, but the real test lay ahead on the Balkans' battlefields. Murad I, ruling from 1362 to 1389, propelled the empire deeper into Europe. He captured Adrianople in 1369, transforming it into the Ottoman capital, a symbol of their growing power. The Ottomans subdued vast regions of Thrace, Macedonia, and Bulgaria, their shadow darkening the hopes of European kingdoms. Fear and desperation drove Balkan rulers to unite under Serbian King Lazar. On June 15, 1389, their armies clashed with the Ottomans on Kosovo Field. Despite their numbers, the Christian coalition was outmatched by the superior tactics and discipline of the Ottoman forces. The fate of Serbia and the Balkans was about to be sealed. King Lazar was captured and executed, Serbia reduced to a vassal state before being fully absorbed into the empire. In the chaos, Sultan Murad I himself fell to the blade of Miloš Obilić, a Serbian nobleman. This assassination was not just a battlefield loss, but a chilling sign of the relentless struggle waged by empires and factions alike. Behind this monumental clash lay a labyrinth of external influences: Byzantine intrigues, rival Serbian lords, Anatolian beyliks, all playing their part in the tragic dance of power and survival. The wheel of fate turned inexorably, and from the ashes of conflict rose one undeniable victor: Mehmed, poised to carry the empire further into history's unforgiving currents. Who decides the fate of an empire torn apart by civil war? How do one man's ruthless choices echo through history? And what price is paid when power is reclaimed through bloodshed? Mehmed I Çelebi faced these exact dilemmas as he wrestled control from his own brothers to restore unity to the Ottoman Empire by the year 1413. Mehmed I ruled until 1421, steering the empire from the brink of collapse toward recovery and consolidation. He reclaimed much of Anatolia, crushed rebellions led by dervishes and fanatics, and rebuilt the central authority. Yet, even as he wielded power decisively, he chose peace with the Byzantine Empire and neighboring Christian states, recognizing his empire's desperate need for respite after the ravages of internecine conflict. But peace was fragile, and the empire's future hung in the balance. His son and successor, Murad II, ascended in 1421 and dedicated 30 years to fortifying this fragile peace. Twice he laid siege to Constantinople. Both attempts failed. Meanwhile, on the Balkan front, Murad II confronted fierce resistance from the Hungarian leader John Hunyadi and the Albanian hero Skanderbeg. Each clash tested the empire's resolve and its vision of expansion. Under Murad II, the Ottoman state transformed into a centralized monarchy, bolstered by a sophisticated bureaucracy and a permanent army. A legal code, the Kanun, was crafted to define the rights and duties of diverse populations and regulate taxation. The Timar system emerged, granting land to cavalrymen, the Sipahis, in exchange for military service. Every reform tightened the grip of power, but was it enough to hold the empire together? In 1451, Murad II abdicated in favor of his son Mehmed II. Yet the peace was deceptive. Just 2 years later, Murad was compelled to return to the throne amid a crisis triggered by a Hungarian invasion. Despite the turmoil, Murad scored a decisive victory against Crusaders at the Battle of Varna in 1444. His death in 1450 marked the end of an era, and set the stage for his son's audacious ambition. Mehmed II, known to history as the Conqueror, embarked on a mission that would define his legacy and reshape the world. From the moment he seized power, his eyes were fixed on Constantinople, the golden apple coveted by generations before him. But the once mighty Byzantine Empire was a shadow of its former self. Only the city and surrounding lands clung to existence, with a population reduced to mere tens of thousands. Ruined neighborhoods became pastures. The new Rome was a ghost of its imperial glory. Yet the city's ancient walls, built in the 5th century under Emperor Theodosius II, still stood formidable. They had withstood countless sieges, including 2 failed Ottoman assaults, one by Bayezid I, another by Murad II. Mehmed meticulously planned his assault. He constructed Rumeli Hisari Fortress on the European side of the Bosporus, joining forces with the existing Anadolu Hisari on the Asian shore to choke off supplies and isolate the city. He rallied an immense army, estimates varying from 80,000 to 150,000 men, janissaries, sipahis, irregular troops, and support units. But Mehmed's secret weapon was artillery. He brought in a Hungarian engineer named Urban, who crafted massive bombards capable of shattering the city's legendary walls. The largest, the Basilica, could hurl stone balls weighing over 700 kilograms, nearly 1.5 kilometers, an unprecedented threat to Byzantine defenses. On April 6, 1453, the Ottoman forces reached Constantinople's gates. Defending the city were a mere 7,000 souls, including Venetian and Genoese mercenaries. Commanding them was the last Byzantine emperor, Constantine XI Palaiologos. Facing impossible odds, the emperor refused Mehmed's offer to surrender the city in exchange for sparing its people and their property. What followed was a brutal siege that would last 53 relentless days. The relentless pounding of cannons echoed against the ancient walls. Ottoman troops tunneled beneath the earth, seeking to collapse the defenses. Wave after wave of assaults crashed against the fortifications. Every decision, every moment, brought the empire closer to irreversible fate. The final chapter of Byzantium's 1,000-year reign was being written in blood and fire, and Mehmed's conquest would change history forever. If you want to unravel more stories where fate hangs on razor-thin decisions and empires rise and fall in waves of tension, subscribe to Quiet History. What does it take to break a city that has withstood centuries? How far will men go when cornered by fate? As the night of May 28th bled into May 29th, the defenders of Constantinople faced their darkest hour. Osmani siege towers loomed like monsters, and ladders scraped against ancient stone walls. Desperation fueled their resistance. They patched breaches, launched daring sorties, and hurled attackers into the abyss below. Yet, the city's fate teetered on the edge of a razor's blade. The decisive assault erupted under the cloak of darkness. For hours, brutal combat raged non-stop near the gates of St. Roman, battered relentlessly by thunderous artillery. Then, a shattering moment. A breach tore through Byzantine defenses. From this fracture, the Bashi bazooks surged forward, wild and fierce, followed relentlessly by the elite janissaries. The city's defenders, though valiant, were overwhelmed by a force that would not relent. Amid the chaos, Emperor Constantine fought with unyielding courage, his sword striking until his final breath. But by midday, the unthinkable had happened. Constantinople was conquered, its walls now in the hands of the Ottoman Empire. The ancient capital, once a bastion of Christendom, was laid open to pillage and ruin, as was custom for conquered cities of that era. For 3 merciless days the city endured horrors beyond measure. Looting swept through its streets like a ravenous storm. Thousands were slaughtered or enslaved, their screams silenced only by the relentless clash of conquest. Priceless artworks, treasures preserved since antiquity, were defiled or stolen. The majestic Hagia Sophia, symbol of Christian glory, was stripped of its faith and transformed into a mosque. The very soul of Byzantium was being erased. Mehmet II entered the city in triumph, flanked by viziers and commanders. As he stepped into Hagia Sophia, he performed a sacred prayer, namaz, marking the irrevocable conversion of the cathedral into a mosque. He then moved to the ruined palace of Byzantine emperors, where legend says he recited verses of Persian poetry, a silent echo amid the crumbling echoes of a fallen empire. A spider spins its web in the emperor's palace, while the owl's mournful cry rings from the towers of Afrosiab. The fall of Constantinople did more than alter a city's fate. It shook the entire Christian world to its core. Pope Nicholas V called for a new crusade, but fractured European monarchs, mired in their own conflicts, turned deaf ears. The Byzantine Empire vanished, and with it, the medieval era itself began to close its final chapter. Yet, for Mehmed, the conquest was only a prologue. He grasped the symbolic weight of Constantinople as a seat of empire, and vowed to rebuild it as a shining jewel of his dominion. He ordered the pillaging to cease, proclaiming amnesty to all surviving inhabitants, a calculated mercy designed to stabilize and repopulate the shattered city. He invited Greeks, Armenians, Jews, Genoese, and others to settle within the city walls, offering tax exemptions and guarantees of protection. The transformation was swift and profound. Hagia Sophia became the city's grandest mosque, its soaring minarets piercing the sky. Inside, Christian mosaics and frescoes were sealed or destroyed, making way for Islamic artistry and spirituality. Around the mosque, Mehmet commissioned the construction of a madrasa, a school of Islamic learning, alongside a maristan, a charitable hospital, public baths, and a free kitchen for the poor. This complex, known as a kulliye, embodied the Ottoman vision of urban life: faith, knowledge, and community woven together in stone and spirit. On the ruins of the Byzantine imperial palace, Mehmed laid the foundations of the Topkapi Palace, a sprawling complex of pavilions, courtyards, and gardens perched between the Golden Horn, the Bosphorus, and the Sea of Marmara. Unlike European royal palaces, which were monolithic, the Topkapi was a city within a city, reflecting a new imperial order and ambition. Economically, the city pulsed with new life. The Grand Bazaar rose from the ashes, an immense covered market that grew to encompass 60 streets and over 4,000 shops. Merchants from every corner of the known world brought their goods here, turning Constantinople, soon to be called Istanbul, into a global crossroads of commerce and culture. But what of the name, the identity? Official documents clung to Constantinople well into the 20th century, yet the people whispered Istanbul, derived from the Greek phrase "istin polin," meaning "to the city." This subtle shift marked a profound transformation. The city was no longer just the capital of an empire. It was the heart of a new civilization, beating to the rhythm of Ottoman destiny. Meanwhile, beyond the city's walls, Mehmed's successors continued to expand. The Ottoman army crushed the forces of Shah Ismail, whose reliance on traditional cavalry proved futile against the firepower of gunpowder weapons. With this victory, Sultan Selim claimed eastern Anatolia and northern Iraq, including the strategic city of Diyarbakir. The empire was growing, unstoppable, and relentless. This was no mere conquest of territory. It was a seismic shift in history. Every decision, every sword stroke, echoed with irreversible consequences. Constantinople's fall was not just the end of an empire, it was the birth of a new world order, shaped by ambition, faith, and the unforgiving hand of fate. If you found this journey through history gripping, subscribe to Quiet History for more stories where the past's darkest moments illuminate the forces shaping our world today. Who holds the keys to power when empires clash? How does one man's ambition redraw the fate of nations? In the early 16th century, the gaze of the Ottoman Empire turned sharply toward Mamluk Egypt, a realm that controlled the vast lands of Syria, Palestine, the Hejaz, including the holy cities of Mecca and Medina, and of course, Egypt itself. But what made the Mamluks so formidable was not just their lands, but their origin. A military caste born from enslaved warriors of predominantly Caucasian descent who had seized control in the 13th century. Their grip on power was about to be violently shattered, but at what cost? In the year 1516, Ottoman forces surged into Syria. On August 24th, the brutal clash at Marj Dabik spelled disaster for the Mamluk army. Sultan al-Ghari, the Mamluk ruler, fell in battle, his death a fatal blow to his people's resistance. One after another, key cities like Aleppo and Damascus opened their gates without firing a shot. The tide of conquest was swift, yet behind this collapse was the human face of fear and the irreversible consequences of defeat. What happens when a dynasty crumbles in the eyes of its own people? By January 1517, Selim I entered Cairo, effectively ending the Mamluk Sultanate. The last Mamluk Sultan, Tuman Bey, was captured and executed at the city gates, a grim symbol of finality. With Egypt under Ottoman control, Selim gained dominion over the most sacred sites in Islam, Mecca and Medina. But this was more than conquest. The ruler of Mecca willingly surrendered the keys to the Kaaba and other holy relics, placing the spiritual heart of Islam into Ottoman hands. This transfer was a seismic shift, not only in politics, but in faith. What did it mean for Selim to become the guardian of Islam's holiest places? Selim adopted the title of Caliph, becoming the spiritual leader of all Muslims. Yet historians debate whether this title was ever officially passed down by the last Abbasid Caliph, who had lived under Mamluk protection. Regardless, this claim bolstered Selim's prestige immensely, cementing the Ottoman Empire's role as the dominant Islamic power. In the shadow of this newfound authority, the empire swelled, nearly doubling in size by the time of Selim's death in 1520. But with power comes the haunting question, can such rapid expansion be sustained without unraveling? Selim's son and successor, Suleiman the Magnificent, inherited not just a vast empire, but an empire on the edge of transformation. Known in his own lands as the Lawgiver, and revered in Europe as the Magnificent, his reign from 1520 to 1566 would be the golden age of Ottoman power and culture. And yet, from the moment he ascended the throne, Suleiman's ambitions surged forward like a storm. The conquest of Belgrade in 1521 was not just a victory, but a gateway, a breach opening into Central Europe itself. How far would this tide of conquest wash over the continent? The fall of Rhodes in 1522 shattered the last stronghold of the Knights Hospitaller in the eastern Mediterranean. Then, in 1526, the devastating Battle of Mohacs crushed the Hungarian army. King Louis II drowned fleeing the battlefield, leaving a throne in chaos and plunging Hungary into turmoil. The land fragmented. Central Hungary became an Ottoman province, Transylvania a vassal state, and the rest fell under Austrian Habsburg control. Suddenly, the Ottomans stood face to face with the Habsburgs, the rulers of Vienna. The stage was set for a confrontation that would shake Europe to its core. Would Suleiman's armies breach the gates of Vienna? In 1529, Suleiman launched his first siege on Vienna. The Ottoman forces pushed relentlessly to the city walls, but winter arrived early, food supplies dwindled, and fierce defenders held firm. The siege failed. Just 3 years later, in 1532, the Ottomans tried again and failed once more. Despite these setbacks, the terror of an Ottoman army knocking at Vienna's gates echoed across Europe, a chilling reminder of the empire's unstoppable might. How much more blood and fire would this struggle demand? While Europe trembled, Suleiman's eastern campaigns carved out victories against the Safavids. In 1534, he seized Tabriz and Baghdad, consolidating control over Mesopotamia, the heartland of today's Iraq. Meanwhile, Ottoman influence spread into North Africa, incorporating Algeria, Tunisia, and Tripolitania, modern Libya, into the empire's vast reach. Yet this control was fragile, often nominal. Local rulers ruled with their own hands, but bowed to the Sultan's distant authority. Could such a sprawling empire remain united when much of its power was merely symbolic? Each conquest, each battle, each political move was a thread in a tapestry of destiny, woven by decisions that could not be undone. Selim and Suleiman stood at crossroads where ambitions collided with fears, faith intertwined with power, and every choice carved new realities. The Ottoman Empire rose as one of the greatest forces the world had ever seen. But with every expansion, the question lingered: could an empire built on conquest endure the inevitable storms ahead? The story of their reigns is a testament to humanity's relentless pursuit of power and the irreversible echoes that follow. If you found this journey into the rise of the Ottoman Empire gripping, stay with Quiet History for more stories where history's turning points come alive. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next chapter in the saga of empires, decisions, and the echoes they leave through time. What does it take to build an empire that stretches across continents? How do the choices of one man ripple through history, shaping the fate of millions? Suleiman the Magnificent stood at the helm of an empire on the brink of its greatest power, but every decision carried a weight that could tip the balance between glory and ruin. At sea, Suleiman relied on the ruthless genius of Admiral Hayreddin Barbarossa, a former pirate turned commander of the Ottoman fleet. Under Barbarossa's command, the Turks seized control of the eastern and central Mediterranean, challenging the naval giants of Europe, Venice, Genoa, and Spain. This was not just a battle for territory. It was a fight for supremacy that would decide the fate of empires. By the middle of the 16th century, the Ottoman Empire had reached its zenith. Its vast lands stretched from Algeria in the west to the Persian Gulf in the east, from Crimea in the north to Yemen and Sudan in the south. 30 million souls lived under its banner, a staggering number for the era. Istanbul, with 500,000 inhabitants, was the largest city in Europe and one of the greatest in the world. But could this sprawling empire hold together under the weight of its own ambition? Suleiman was not only a conqueror. He was known as the lawgiver. Under his rule, the empire's laws were systematized, tax reforms enacted, and a complex bureaucracy established. Provinces, or eyalets, were governed by beylerbey, subdivided into sanjaks, led by sanjak beys. This intricate administrative web was designed to maintain order, but every thread was a potential fault line waiting to snap. The empire's strength was not only in its armies, but in its culture. Suleiman's court was a beacon for poets, artists, architects, and scholars. The Sultan himself wrote poetry under the pen name Muhibi. His chief architect, Mimar Sinan, crafted masterpieces like the Süleymaniye Mosque in Istanbul, the Shehzade Mosque, and the Selimiye complex in Edirne, structures that still define the city's skyline. Yet, beneath this cultural flourishing lurked the tension of an empire balancing tradition and change. Ottoman artisans gained worldwide renown for their exquisite miniatures, calligraphy, carpets, and ceramics. Turkish silk and metalwork were prized exports, flowing along critical trade routes that linked east and west. But with wealth came envy and the constant threat of conflict. Could the empire protect its riches without unraveling its fragile peace? One of the empire's most remarkable features was its religious tolerance. Non-Muslim populations, Christians and Jews, were organized into millets, autonomous religious communities with their own leaders, courts, and schools. The Orthodox millet answered to the Patriarch of Constantinople, Armenians to their patriarch, Jews to the chief rabbi. This system allowed the empire to manage its diverse peoples, but it was a delicate balance that could shatter under pressure. Non-Muslims paid the jizya tax, exempting those who converted to Islam. They were barred from military service and high office, but these restrictions were often seen as privileges, sparing them the brutal hardships of war. Still, beneath this veneer of protection lay simmering tensions and the ever-present shadow of the Devshirme system, a reminder that loyalty was never guaranteed. The turning point came under Suleiman's successor, Selim II. His reign was marked by the conquest of Cyprus from Venice between 1570 and 1571, a bold move that ignited a fierce response. In retaliation, a Holy League formed, a coalition of Christian powers led by Spain, Venice, and the Papal States, poised to challenge Ottoman dominance. On October 7, 1571, the Battle of Lepanto erupted near modern-day Naupaktos, Greece. The galley fleets clashed in the largest naval battle of the era, with Don Juan of Austria commanding the Holy League's forces. The Ottoman fleet suffered a catastrophic defeat, losing over 200 galleys and 30,000 men killed or captured. This was not just a military loss. It was a shattering blow to Ottoman naval supremacy and a turning point that echoed through history. The Battle of Lepanto marked the first major defeat for the Ottoman navy and exposed the vulnerabilities of an empire that had seemed invincible. Could Suleiman's legacy withstand this moment of reckoning? Would the empire's vast reach and intricate systems hold firm, or would the tide of history sweep it away? The answers lay in the choices yet to come. If you want to uncover more about the fateful decisions that shaped empires and the human stories behind history's greatest turning points, subscribe to Quiet History. What happens when a single battle shifts the tide of an empire? When Miguel de Cervantes, wounded and one-handed, calls it the greatest event of centuries past and future, does that mean victory or doom? The Battle of Lepanto was hailed as a decisive blow against the Ottoman threat, a turning point lauded across Europe. Yet within a year, the Ottomans rebuilt their fleet, forcing Venice into peace and the painful loss of Cyprus. Triumph felt, but was it truly permanent? The shadows of consequences stretched ominously ahead. Could an empire's greatest power be undermined, not by enemies, but by its own rulers' choices? After Suleiman the Magnificent's reign, the empire's pulse slowed. Sultans withdrew into the opulent confines of the harem, leaving governance to ambitious viziers and court factions. The era of the Sultanate of Women dawned, where real power rested in the hands of mothers and concubines rather than the throne. What price would this internal shift demand? The thread of control was fraying rapidly. When a once feared military elite becomes a privileged caste obsessed with its own survival, what future awaits the empire? The Devshirme system that fueled Ottoman might decayed. The Janissaries, once invincible warriors, turned into political puppeteers, toppling sultans and installing favorites. Their loyalty fractured, their purpose twisted. Was this betrayal of strength the beginning of irreversible decline? The empire's foundation was cracking beneath its feet. How does an empire's economy crumble when the world's trade routes shift like tectonic plates? The Age of Discovery rerouted riches away from Ottoman hands. European merchants bypassed Ottoman lands, trading directly with India and China around Africa's Cape. Meanwhile, a flood of cheap American silver sparked inflation, a silent but lethal enemy. The empire's wealth slipped through its fingers as financial chaos brewed unseen. Could this economic storm be weathered, or would it consume the empire whole? Despite these mounting crises, the Ottoman Empire fought on, clutching its fading glory. After a grueling 24-year struggle, the Ottomans seized Crete from Venice in 1669. Soon after, war erupted with Poland in 1672, ending with Ottoman control over Podolia. Yet these victories masked deeper cracks. The empire's ambition burned, but its core was weakening. What would happen when unchecked ambition collided with internal decay? Could the sprawling Ottoman war machine succeed once more, or was its fate sealed? In 1683, under Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa Pasha, 200,000 Ottoman soldiers besieged Vienna. The city's fall seemed inevitable. But salvation came from an unexpected alliance. Polish King Jan Sobieski led a coalition that shattered the siege. The crushing defeat was a cataclysmic blow, forcing Ottoman retreat. The question loomed: had the empire's relentless advance finally met its match. What happens when a once unstoppable force is pushed back, and Europe turns from defense to counterattack? The aftermath forged the Holy League. Austria, Poland, Venice, and Russia united against Ottoman power. The Great Turkish War raged until the Treaty of Karlowitz in 1699, carving away Hungary, Transylvania, Croatia, and Podolia from the empire's grasp. Was this the empire's last stand before the fall? The struggle for survival intensified. Could endless wars and territorial losses weaken an empire from within as much as from without? The 18th century chained the Ottomans to continuous conflict, especially with Russia advancing relentlessly along the northern Black Sea coast. The Treaty of Küçük-Kaynarca in 1774 handed Russia a critical victory: access to the Black Sea and a pretext to interfere in Ottoman internal affairs through the protection of Orthodox subjects. The empire's sovereignty slipped like sand. But was it only external enemies that doomed the empire? Deep inside, corruption festered, bureaucracy ossified, and military traditions decayed. Provincial governors, natubas and ions, grew powerful, defying central authority and carving near-independent fiefdoms. The empire's heart was bleeding from within. Could this fractured system survive the relentless pressures pressing from every side? Or was this the final unraveling of a once mighty force? History had brought the Ottoman Empire to a crossroads, shaped by choices both made and forced. Each decision, each loss, each betrayal built a chain leading to a future no one could predict. Only fear and uncertainty. What would come next was anyone's guess. But one thing was clear: the empire's fate hung by a thread, trembling between resurgence and ruin. If you want to uncover more stories of fate, power, and the irreversible choices that shaped history, make sure to subscribe to Quiet History. What happens when an empire's own guardians turn into its deadliest enemies? In the heart of Istanbul, the Janissaries, once elite soldiers, had become a state within a state, staging rebellions and toppling sultans at will. This internal chaos was more than a power struggle. It was a ticking time bomb threatening the very survival of the Ottoman Empire. The urgent need for reform was clear, yet the path forward was riddled with peril. Sultan Selim III, ruling from 1789 to 1807, dared to challenge the old order. He envisioned a modern army modeled after European forces, the Nizami Sadid, and sought sweeping administrative and financial reforms. But his bold vision collided head first with fierce resistance from the Janissaries, who saw their privileges slipping away. Their backlash was brutal and swift. In 1807, Selim was overthrown, and his reforms were crushed under the weight of conservatism. The empire seemed trapped in a cycle of fear and reaction. Yet the story did not end there. Sultan Mahmud II, ascending the throne in 1808, learned from Selim's fatal mistakes. He understood that reform meant confronting the Janissaries head-on. For nearly 2 decades he prepared meticulously, waiting for the right moment to strike. That moment came in 1826, when the Janissaries rebelled once more. Mahmud ordered his artillery to bombard their barracks in Istanbul, annihilating the corps that had long held the empire hostage. This brutal purge, known as the Auspicious Incident, shattered the old guard, and opened the gates to radical change.
With the Janissaries eliminated, Mahmud unleashed a wave of reforms that reshaped the empire's very fabric. He built a new European-style army, overhauled the administration, and established ministries modeled on Western governments. He sent young Ottomans to study abroad, founded modern schools and hospitals, and fiercely reasserted central authority over rebellious provinces. Yet, even as the empire tried to heal itself, the external world was closing in, and the cracks in Ottoman power widened dangerously. In 1821, the Greek War of Independence erupted, marking the first successful national liberation on the Balkans. By 1830, Greece emerged as a free state, a devastating blow to Ottoman prestige and control. Just a year later, Muhammad Ali, the Egyptian pasha and de facto independent ruler, launched a war against his sovereign, nearly capturing Istanbul itself. Only the intervention of European powers prevented the empire's collapse. The once mighty Ottoman Empire was now a fragile giant, its fate hanging by a thread. Over the following decades, the empire adopted its first criminal code in 1854 and a commercial code in 1850, while establishing mixed courts to mediate between different communities. Yet territorial losses continued. By 1878, Austria-Hungary occupied Bosnia and Herzegovina, territories still nominally under Ottoman suzerainty until 1908. Meanwhile, in Africa and Asia, European powers tightened their grip. France conquered Algeria in the 1830s and turned Tunisia into a protectorate by 1881. Britain occupied Egypt in 1882, maintaining only a formal Ottoman claim until the First World War. Economically, the empire was strangled by humiliating trade agreements and capitulations that crippled its development. Each decision, each reform, each rebellion was a desperate attempt to stave off collapse. But the empire's fate was no longer in its own hands. The choices made by Selim, Mahmud, Abdul-Majid, and others were irreversible steps on a path toward an uncertain future. The question remained, could the Ottoman Empire survive the storm it had unleashed within itself? If you want to uncover more stories of empires on the brink and the human dramas behind history's greatest turning points, subscribe to Quiet History. What happens when a mighty empire sinks deeper into debt, handcuffed by foreign bankers? The Ottoman Empire in the late 19th century became trapped in a financial snare, borrowing heavily from European banks on terms that strangled its sovereignty. By 1881, a grim milestone was reached: the creation of the Ottoman Public Debt Administration, a foreign-controlled body that seized control over much of the empire's income, siphoning wealth to satisfy European creditors. How long could the empire survive under such a merciless financial leash? At the heart of this crisis stood Sultan Abdul Hamid II, who, upon ascending the throne in 1876, tore up the constitution and dissolved the parliament, retreating into ruthless autocracy. His grip tightened with brutal crackdowns against dissenters and a fervent push to infuse state ideology with Islamic power. Claiming the mantle of caliph, the spiritual leader of all Muslims, Abdul Hamid wielded religion as both shield and sword to repel European encroachment. But did this iron resolve strengthen the empire or push it closer to collapse? While Abdul Hamid battled internal strife, the Ottoman Empire's borders continued to bleed. In 1897, a short but devastating Greco-Turkish war erupted. Though Ottoman forces claimed victory on the battlefield, the intervention of the great powers forced the empire to concede autonomy to Crete. This island, a bitter prize, slipped away just over a decade later, when it merged with Greece in 1913. Every loss was a blow not only to territory, but to the empire's very soul, signaling a slow, relentless unraveling. Caught in the geopolitical crossfire, Abdul Hamid played a perilous game of diplomacy, balancing European powers against each other like a master chess player. His strongest alliance was with Germany, a nation uniquely free from territorial claims against the Ottomans. German military instructors drilled the Ottoman army, while engineers forged ambitious projects, most notably the Baghdad Railway, intended to link Istanbul with the Persian Gulf, a symbol of modernity and influence. But could these ties forge a lifeline, or were they just another thread tying the empire to foreign interests? Beneath the surface, discontent festered. In 1889, a secret society was born within the halls of the Military Medical Academy, Union and Progress. These students, later known as the Young Turks, dreamed of restoring the Constitution and sweeping reforms. Their message spread quietly but decisively among officers, bureaucrats, and intellectuals, especially in European provinces of the empire. What began as whispered hopes gathered force, threatening to ignite a revolution that could shatter Abdul Hamid's iron grip. By 1908, the Young Turks seized the moment. Lieutenant Niazi Bey defiantly marched with his troops into the mountains of Macedonia, openly rejecting the government's authority. The rebellion quickly gained momentum as officers and units rallied to their cause. On July 23rd, insurgents captured a monastery near Bitola, then spread their control to surrounding towns. Cornered and powerless, Sultan Abdul Hamid was forced to yield, restoring the constitution and promising a new parliament. But did this concession mark a new dawn, or the calm before a storm? The fragile peace shattered less than a year later. In April 1909, a counter-revolution erupted in Istanbul, led by religious soldiers and theology students outraged by the Young Turks' reforms. The uprising was crushed by troops loyal to the Constitution, but the damage was done. Sultan Abdul Hamid was deposed, replaced by his brother Mehmed V, a weak figure entirely under Young Turk control. What was supposed to be a victory for freedom had delivered a new form of authoritarian rule, darker and more insidious than before. Power concentrated in the hands of a ruthless triumvirate, Enver Pasha, Talat Pasha, and Jamal Pasha. These leaders of the Committee of Union and Progress pushed aggressive centralization and forced Turkification policies that ignited fierce resistance among the empire's non-Turkish peoples. Originally, the Young Turks championed a vision of liberalism, constitutionalism, and Ottomanism, the idea of forging a single, empire-wide identity beyond ethnic and religious lines. But as the empire lost more European lands, especially heavily Christian ones, that vision began to crumble under the weight of harsh, uncompromising nationalism. How does an empire balance on the edge of irreversible change, caught between the promises of reform and the horrors of repression? The Ottoman Empire's last decades were a relentless chain of fateful decisions, each step deeper into turmoil and loss.
What would come next? The story was far from over. Darker chapters awaited. If you want to dive deeper into the shadows of history, follow Quiet History for more journeys through the turning points that shaped our world. What drives a nation to the brink of collapse? How do decisions made in shadowed rooms echo through decades? Enver Pasha, the military minister, stood at the crossroads of history. His choice would seal the fate of the Ottoman Empire. The Young Turks, once reformers, had shifted to fierce Turkish nationalism, demanding assimilation or subjugation of all other peoples within the empire. But this vision came at a grave cost as the empire's fragile unity began to shatter. The empire's external walls crumbled first. Between 1911 and 1912, Italy seized Libya, stripping the Ottomans of vital territory. Then, in the turbulent Balkan Wars of 1912 to 1913, almost all European lands slipped away. Macedonia, Thrace, Epirus, Crete, all lost, except a narrow stretch near Istanbul. For many young Turk leaders rooted in these Balkan provinces, the losses cut deep, turning personal pain into political desperation. Faced with humiliation and eroding power, the young Turk government gambled everything, aligning with Germany and Austria-Hungary in the Great War. A decision made by a select few, led by Enver Pasha, would drag the empire into a global inferno. The war unleashed endless suffering. Famine swept through cities, epidemics claimed countless lives, and an economic collapse rendered daily survival a nightmare. Among the darkest chapters was the forced deportation of Armenians in 1915, a campaign of mass murder that witnessed between 600,000 and 1.5 million perish. The world would come to know these horrors as the Armenian Genocide, an irreversible scar that haunts history to this day. The battlefield saw desperate clashes. In 1915, Ottoman forces repelled the British at the Dardanelles, a fierce victory at Gallipoli that kindled hope. Yet on the Caucasus front, initial Ottoman advances crumbled beneath relentless Russian assaults. Meanwhile, in Mesopotamia and Palestine, British troops, bolstered by Arab insurgents, relentlessly pushed back Ottoman lines. By autumn of 1918, the empire's fate was sealed. Bulgaria, its last Balkan ally, surrendered on September 29th. Germany, the empire's chief supporter, teetered on defeat. In this bleak landscape, Ahmed Izzet Pasha, the new Grand Vizier, sought a path to survival through peace talks with the Allied powers. On October 30th, 1918, aboard the British battleship Agamemnon in the harbor of Mudros on Lemnos Island, the Ottoman Empire signed its surrender. The Mudros armistice demanded the empire open its straits to Allied navies, disarm its forces, and relinquish control over railways, telegraphs, and strategic sites. The Allies gained a chilling right to occupy any part of Ottoman lands at the slightest threat to their security. No sooner had the ink dried than Allied troops moved to seize the Straits, Istanbul, and other critical regions. The Ottoman Empire, once a proud sovereign entity, was effectively erased from the world map, its destiny now bound to decisions far beyond its control, set to be hammered out at the Paris Peace Conference. The peace terms were unforgiving. On August 10, 1920, the Treaty of Sèvres carved away the empire's Arab lands and ceded parts of Anatolia to Greece and Armenia. The Straits were declared a demilitarized zone.
The stage was set for a brutal struggle. The heart of Anatolia became a battleground for national survival. Fierce combat erupted against the Greek army occupying western Anatolia. The decisive clash unfolded by the Sakarya River in August and September 1921. Against overwhelming odds, Turkish forces secured a critical victory, turning the tide of war. This victory ignited a resurgence. The strategic initiative passed decisively into Turkish hands. Within a year, the Turkish forces expelled Greek troops from Anatolia entirely. On October 11, 1922, the Mudanya Armistice was signed. Eastern Thrace, the European part of modern Turkey, returned to Turkish control without a fight. Allied forces withdrew from Istanbul and the Straits, marking the end of occupation. The long night of empire was over, but the scars and shadows of those fateful decisions would linger. The story of the Ottoman Empire's fall is a relentless cascade of irreversible choices, human fears, and tragic consequences, etched forever into the annals of history. If this journey into history moved you, subscribe to Quiet History for more immersive stories where every decision changes the world. What does it mean to lose an empire? To watch centuries of rule collapse in a matter of moments. In 1922, the world witnessed the official end of the Ottoman Sultanate. The last Ottoman Sultan, Mehmed VI Vahdettin, fled aboard a British warship, his reign extinguished as the shadows of history closed in. But what came next was far from certain, a tense crossroads where fate hung by a thread. From late November 1922 to early February 1923, the fate of a fallen empire was hammered out in Lausanne, Switzerland. The peace conference rippled with tension as diplomats gathered under heavy clouds of uncertainty. Leading the Turkish delegation was İsmet İnönü, a close ally of Mustafa Kemal, the man who would shape Turkey's dawn. The stakes were colossal. The future of Anatolia and eastern Thrace rested on their shoulders. Would this fragile new state survive the storm of international politics? Unlike the earlier Treaty of Sèvres, which had shattered the Ottoman lands beyond repair, the Treaty of Lausanne, signed on July 24, 1923, redrew the map with sharper, more definitive lines. Turkey's sovereignty was recognized over Anatolia and eastern Thrace, but the price was steep, relinquishing all its former Arab provinces. Control over the vital straits remained, but under strict limitations. This was no mere treaty. It was the birth certificate of a nation struggling to rise from ashes. But the struggle was just beginning. On October 29, 1923, the Grand National Assembly declared the Republic of Turkey. Mustafa Kemal was chosen as its first president, an emblem of resolve in a turbulent era. This date marked the official birth of modern Turkey, but victory in war and international recognition were only the opening acts. Mustafa Kemal knew that true independence demanded more than borders. It required transforming the very soul of the nation. What does it take to shatter centuries of tradition? To sever the ties binding a people to their past? The first step was radical and irreversible. On March 3, 1924, the institution of the Caliphate, once the spiritual authority of the Muslim world, was abolished. Osman dynasty members were expelled, and a new constitution declared Turkey a national republic. The echoes of empire faded, replaced by the pillars of a new ideology, 6 arrows, symbolizing a vision that rejected the old and embraced the future. These 6 principles, republicanism, nationalism, populism, secularism, statism, and reformism, became the beating heart of the Republic of Turkey. But the most profound changes were yet to come, shaking the foundations of culture and daily life. In 1925, the traditional fez was banned, replaced by European hats, a symbol as simple as it was powerful, severing identity from empire. The calendar shifted, the clock reset, and Turkey's rhythms aligned with the West. Resistance simmered beneath the surface, but the revolution marched on. The reforms surged forward with relentless force. In 1926, a new civil code based on Swiss law was adopted, dismantling centuries of religious legal tradition. Polygamy was outlawed, civil marriage introduced, and men and women declared equal before the law. By 1930, women earned voting rights in local elections, and by 1934, at the national level, an astonishing leap that placed Turkey among the pioneers of women's suffrage worldwide. But each reform stirred tension, the price of progress measured in unease and defiance. The secularization of the state carved deeper still. In 1928, the Constitution was stripped of Islam as the state religion. Religious courts and schools were shuttered, Sufi brotherhoods banned, the Islamic calendar abandoned. The language itself was transformed, the Arabic script replaced with Latin letters, signaling a deliberate severance from the East and a bold embrace of Europe. Mustafa Kemal himself traveled the countryside, teaching the new alphabet, a personal mission to reshape identity from the ground up. There was no turning back. The linguistic reform purged Persian and Arabic words, replacing them with Turkic equivalents or new creations, reshaping not just communication, but consciousness itself. Meanwhile, the economy was thrust into modernization with equal urgency. The state took command, launching industrialization, fostering national industry, and building the infrastructure of a modern nation under the watchful eyes of those who had dared to dream beyond empire. But the fragility of this transformation lurked beneath every success. The choices made in this crucible of history were irreversible. Every reform, every decree, every ban was a step into the unknown, sometimes met with fierce resistance, other times with cautious hope. Mustafa Kemal understood the stakes. Failure would mean a return to chaos, or worse, fragmentation. Success meant forging a new identity, one built on secularism, nationalism, and modernity. The road ahead was perilous, but the journey of Turkey had already begun, marked by decisions that would shape generations to come. The story of Turkey's rebirth is a testament to human courage in the face of overwhelming odds, a narrative of a nation wrestling with its past to claim its future. It is a story of bold leaders and ordinary people caught in the whirlwind of irreversible change. If you want to dive deeper into the dramatic tales that shaped our world, subscribe to Quiet History and join us in uncovering the untold stories behind the headlines. What happens when a nation's soul is torn between tradition and radical change? How far can one man push a society before the backlash becomes inevitable? Mustafa Kemal Ataturk dared to rewrite Turkey's destiny. But at what cost? The transformation he unleashed would ignite fierce resistance, brutal suppression, and irreversible choices that still haunt the country today. Ataturk's vision was relentless. Forge a modern Turkey through sweeping reforms, railways stretching thousands of kilometers, linking distant regions, towering factories and booming banks, reshaping the economy. Education became a battlefield, with thousands of schools and universities opening their doors, and compulsory primary schooling molding new generations. But progress demanded sacrifice, and those sacrifices stoked fires of opposition that threatened to engulf the Republic. The conservative Islamic factions saw these reforms as an existential threat. In 1925 and 1930, religiously charged uprisings erupted, fierce, passionate, and ultimately crushed with ruthless force. The young Republic's answer was clear. No dissent would be tolerated under the iron fist of an authoritarian single-party regime. This was not just a political decision. It was a reckoning, a deliberate silencing of voices that clashed with the state's vision. Ataturk's cult of personality grew, becoming inseparable from official ideology, a symbol both revered and feared. Yet beyond borders, he preached a fragile ideal: peace at home, peace in the world. Could Turkey truly reconcile with its former enemies? The fragile handshake with Greece in 1930, after a decade of bitter hostility and tragic population exchanges, signaled a daring hope. But peace was a tightrope walk, where one misstep could unleash chaos again. In 1936, Turkey wrestled back a crucial piece of sovereignty. The Montreux Convention revised the regime governing the strategic straits, granting Turkey control over foreign warships passing through. This was not just a treaty, it was a bold statement. Turkey reclaiming its place on the world stage, defying past constraints. Yet this newfound power carried burdens and dangers that would ripple through decades to come. The death of Mustafa Kemal Ataturk on the 10th of November 1938 was a seismic event, national mourning that froze time at 10:15 in the morning. Sirens wailed across the country. Life paused as millions remembered the founder of modern Turkey. But with his passing, the Republic stood at a crossroads. Could his legacy survive the turbulent tides ahead, or would it be forever fractured by competing visions? His successor, İsmet İnönü, carried the heavy mantle forward, navigating Turkey through the tempest of the Second World War with a delicate neutrality. Yet peace was only a prelude to new challenges. The Cold War cast long shadows, pushing Turkey closer to the West. Joining NATO in 1952 symbolized a decisive alignment, anchoring Turkey's future in a precarious balance between East and West. The introduction of a multi-party system in 1945 promised democratic renewal, culminating in the historic election victory of the Democratic Party in 1950. But democracy in Turkey was a fragile flame, threatened repeatedly by the military, which saw itself as guardian of Ataturk's secular legacy. Coups in 1960, 1971, 1980, 1990, and 1997 shattered hopes and underscored an unending cycle of fragile governance. Each military intervention was a grim response to perceived threats against secularism, but it plunged the country into crisis, fostering a turbulent political landscape. These cycles of democratic hope and authoritarian interruption became the defining rhythm of late 20th century Turkey, a nation caught in relentless struggle to define itself. At the dawn of the 21st century, The Justice and Development Party rose to power under Recep Tayyip Erdogan, steering Turkey on a new course. Economic growth surged and international influence expanded, but the legacy of Kemalism was challenged like never before. The resurgence of moderate Islamist ideology sparked fierce debates over the nation's soul, questioning the very foundations laid almost a century earlier. Nearly 100 years after the Republic's birth, Ataturk's legacy remains a battleground of conflicting interpretations. To some, he is a heroic liberator, the architect of a modern Turkish state. To others, an authoritarian figure who imposed Western values and suppressed Islamic traditions by force. Yet no one can deny the magnitude of his impact, a man whose choices reshaped a nation irrevocably. Today's Turkey is a land of paradoxes, a tapestry woven from threads of East and West, empire and nationhood, Islam and secularism, authoritarianism and democracy. It is a nation that has survived by balancing contradictions, adapting and evolving through relentless upheavals. Perhaps this very ability to synthesize opposing forces holds the secret to Turkey's endurance, a story still unfolding, shaped by the echoes of fateful decisions made nearly a century ago. What lies ahead for Turkey? The past is a shadow that stretches long, but the future remains unwritten. In this crucible of history where choices have meant survival or collapse, the nation continues to wrestle with its identity, an enduring testament to the power and peril of transformation. If this journey through Turkey's turbulent history moved you, stay with Quiet History for more stories where history's choices carve the paths of nations. Subscribe and never miss how the past shapes our world today. What if the choices made by a few ripple across centuries, sealing the fate of entire societies? Can the lessons of one era truly guide another through the storm of modernization and globalization? The weight of these decisions presses down, and history waits silently to reveal the cost. Imagine standing at a crossroads, where every step forward promises progress, yet risks erasing the very identity that defines a people. This is the dilemma faced by countless civilizations, grappling with the relentless tide of change. Each choice carries consequences that can never be undone, shaping destinies beyond their own time. But how do we, observers of history, discern which stories hold the key to understanding our present struggles? How can the echoes of past decisions illuminate paths through today's global upheavals? The answer lies buried in the decisions made by those who dared to confront the unknown. Through these narratives, Quiet History brings you closer to the human fear behind irreversible choices, the tension of moments when everything hangs in the balance. These are not just tales of the past. They are warnings, guides, and sometimes tragic mirrors reflecting our own challenges. Join us on this relentless journey where history's lessons are not just told, but lived, where every decision is a thread in the fabric of fate, and every consequence demands reckoning. Offer your themes for future stories and subscribe to Quiet History to uncover the fraught pulse of humanity's most critical crossroads.